And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
One of the things I enjoy reviewing games is when I get small games from a publisher that I've never heard of and they turn out to be a fantastically great game. That was the case with Adventureland Games when I got Archaeology, the card game. I mean, I really enjoy that card game. It's a lot of fun just playing back and forth. So I was really looking forward to Phil Harding and what he produced next. What he came out with the next game is called Cannonball Colony. Now, when you open up the box here, you'll see that it's kind of a sliding. You basically have this white box that slides out of it. You then open this box to get all your pieces that come in the game. Cannonball Colony is, I don't really know. If someone asked me to explain what it was, I would say it's almost a race or an area control game, maybe a little bit of a mix in between. Let's look at the board here. Here's the board of Cannonball Colony. Now, this is a board for 4 players. With 2 players, you'd play with just 2. With 3 players, you would play with 3, like thus. But there we go, 4 players. And there's some cool mountain pieces here. They're just basically plastic pyramids, but they add a little bit of flavor to the game, having these pyramids on top of the different spots on the board, and I like that. The pieces themselves are pretty good quality. We have these plastic squares. Hard plastic squares, and these are roads. See, each player at the beginning of the game is going to put their ship piece, and really a ship piece is kind of there almost for decoration because it shows where you start. And after that, you don't use it much anymore. But players are going to use this ship piece to start colonizing this island. Apparently, everybody wants to colonize this island at the same time, and for some reason, the typical countries are here. We have England, and we have France, and there's Spain, and Portugal. I'm actually find it a little odd that Australia is not on the list, but we'll be that as it may. Players have a few options of what they can do on their turn. They can build these road pieces. These are neutral road pieces, and they can build 1 or 2 of them on these grassy spots, or they can build 1 on a tree spot. They can never build them on the ocean spots or where there's a mountain. Now, when they're building these roads, they have to build them adjacent to other roads, and you're basically trying to set up a network of roads so that eventually you can put down your forts. Each player has a player card, and on that player card, you can see here, this is Spain's player card. On that player card is all their forts. Once you get your last fort on the board, see there's a number 10 underneath there, you win the game. But you need to put your forts on top of roads. And as players put down forts, there's also other restrictions. You can't have them next to your other forts, so you're going to have to build a little bit apart. But after a player, if you see here's the first fort they can build, the second fort, the third fort, then a player can build a cannon. Of course, that's why it's called Cannonball Colony. And once you build cannons, these cannons can destroy forts that are in the same row or column as that cannon. But more importantly, an opponent cannot build a colony in that row or column, basically. After the player builds 3 more, they have another cannon they can put on the board. After 2 more, they have a blockade. Basically, when this is built, it blocks cannons. It can never be destroyed, and so I guess it's a very useful defense mechanism because as the game progresses, it gets harder and harder to find legal spots that you can place forts on the board. Once you build your 10th fort, as I said, you win the game. Now, the game components are very good, especially for a small publisher. I mean, this is really nice. Like I said, plastic pieces, lots of squares. They're kind of chunky to hold. And the game is over, as I said, when one player reaches 10 forts or when this big pile of road squares runs out, and that actually has a much more viable, I think that will probably happen more often than players completing or getting all 10 of their forts out, especially if players play very aggressively. Now, the game quality is very good, especially for a small publisher. It's an interesting game in a sense because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build quickly. Not so much build quickly, but get out quickly and get as many forts out as possible, while at the same time making sure you don't put them in positions that can be easily taken out by opponents' cannons. Once an opponent takes your fort out, you're kind of behind. And this is really essentially in a race game because if you get behind a fort, in a sense, the other player is that much farther ahead of you. And really in this game, as in some other games I've played, if you make 1 or 2 wrong moves at the wrong point, you really can lose the entire game. The game makes sense to me. I like placing the roads all over the board, and it's fun to go around the mountains and put your cannon in the spot that really irritates your opponent. But it just seemed to lack something for me. Maybe it was too dry. I just didn't feel like we were building colonies. I felt like we were just placing things in the best possible way It had the same, I got almost the same feeling from it as an older game called Fresh Fish, although this game is a lot simpler than that Fresh Fish was, but it just didn't get a lot of tension. When you're behind, especially in a 2-player game, when you're behind, there's very little chance of you catching up. In a 4-player game, you can hope that the other players kind of stimmy the guy in the lead and maybe you have a chance to come back. But there are times also where you look at your network and you realize the way you've built your roads and the places you've built your forts and the places where your opponents have put their cannons, you're really not going to be able to come back with any kind of great comeback. So I give props to the game, and maybe it's up some people's alley. Archaeology, I thought, was a really well-themed game. This game is themed okay. Much as I like these cubes, a cube as a cannon just doesn't really bring a lot to the game to me. And the cannons only can destroy a few forts, and after that, they're kind of just a defensive mechanism. So there's not a lot of aggressiveness other than basically just trying to be an irritant to the opponents. So it's a nice game. It's pleasant, but I don't know if pleasant is the kind of adjective that I want to give to a game that I want to play all the time. So mediocre quality for me. Not quality, but mediocre feelings I have about the game. So you may or may not like it depending on how well you like an abstract race/snaking roads around the board game.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.